So this is part 3 or part C of today's Khoodeelaar television channel, broadcast online on the internet from London, UK. Essentially, by the movement defending the and from the community in the East End of London. And that movement defending the community in and from the East End of London was founded on 13th of June, 1963. So we are updating in this part on the campaign for justice for these children. Shamima Begum and her 3 friends, school friends, who were from what we call the Dainford School. The corruption on the part of the bureaucracies involved in these schools currently is most recently exposed in the adoption of the name of another school as a complete fraudulent attempt to disguise and suppress the truth about the betrayal of the children that took place. So they've got a name Mulberry. Mulberry School is in Tower Hamlets, but Mulberry School's record is very different in many respects, not necessarily squeaky clean, but Mulberry School as compared to the Dainford School is very much a different school. And we have been talking about that because I saved the Mulberry School for girls, in 1987 in a campaign that I physically did conduct all by myself with few exceptions. And I collected 3,200 signatures, not a very large number in multinational terms, but in the context of that school and its population, it was significant. And I visited about almost 80% or so of the addresses that were listed for the children attending at the school at the time. So Mulberry School was saved by me, and my involvement in saving it dates back to some years before 1987, which I shall come back to. And also, it refers to the behavior of Daphne Gould, who was the head teacher at the time in 1987. But behavior of Daphne Gould was in aid of racists at the department at the expense of education in 1992 when she was adopted by the DFE, or the department kind of denying education, because they wanted to defeat me and my campaign in defense of the parents' rights and the rights of the children at the Stratford School. That was some years later, let's say 5 years after 1987. So Daphne Gould was a mercenary, as a parasite who had no conscience and no qualms about denying the debt she owed to me, or denying my work for education. Because in 1987, when I defended the Mulberry School from the plot to be merged into a de facto boys mixed sex school, I had no personal interest in any shape or form except to do the right thing by the children and by the community, which has been, just for reference, vindicated by the fact that Michelle Obama, while she was still the first lady, made 2 significant contacts with the school. One, she visited it and praised the children and the achievements of the school. And the other was that she got some of them, over to visit Washington, D.C. and the White House. This is not something that is consistent with the record and the evidence of the other things that are going on, have been going on in Tower Hamlets. For example, the whole series of things concerning Shamima Begum and her 3 children, school children friends, or school friends. And The two of them were with her when they were photographed for the first time crossing from Turkey into Syria in February 2015. So the Supreme Court in the UK has done the bidding of the UK government and rubber stamped the UK government's removal from Shamima Begum of her British citizenship, which she acquired by birth. And Shamima Begum is not a citizen of any other country, or she has no other nationality. So she has been illegally, unlawfully cast into statelessness, which is against the law, international law, by the UK. And for the time being, we are focusing on all the facts that have never been publicly aired or mentioned about Shamima Begum being betrayed, let down by the Tower Hamlets Council. And we are starting in the scratch, if you like, or it's the beginning. Original, world exclusive. And none of these facts is disputable. Facts that we are stating and updating on regularly. And none of this also, incidentally, has been mentioned by Fleet Street, most certainly not even by The Guardian. And none of this has been, of course, reported or recognized as failures, serious failures for the Tower Hamlets Council. Not recognized by the so-called local newspaper, or news outlet called the East London Idiotizer. I gave it the name probably in the 90s or late 80s, the Idiotizer, because of the content and the role and the narrative of idiocy. And the verb transitive idiotizer means that it instead of reporting, instead of the original kind of ancient name advertiser in the names of the titles of the papers, instead of carrying the advertisements in the kind of previously practiced independent or non-partisan way, the East London Idiotizer has been completely idiotic in spreading idiocies, ignorance, and stupidities to the so-called readers in the area essentially covered by the East London Idiotizer, which is the London Borough of Tower Hamlets. And I have been the most vocal and consistent kind of campaigner against the corruption and stupidity that Tower Hamlets Council carries on and perpetrates, and the East London Idiotizer covers up and hides. And among the perpetrators of this hiding and kind of suppression and denial has been a man who was for several years promoting Lutfur Rahman via his so-called London kind of diary that man ran, called Dave Hill. So Dave Hill is back again on another platform. He is no longer with The Guardian. So he is promoting the fantasy that Lutfur Rahman has become get an effective kind of election to become elected mayor at the expense of Tower Hamlets. So that is Dave Hill. And there is another one that we are actually talking about, which is the mayor of Newham. In Newham, apparently there is a campaign to get the elected mayor post scrapped. I don't believe that it will succeed. If it does succeed, then I will accordingly revise my statement and update the commentary. But as things stand today, I don't think there is enough activity to remove the elected mayor. The reason why there is not enough activity is because the local Labour Party in Newham is as corrupt as the local Labour Party in Tower Hamlets, as the local Labour Party in other places like Bristol and Croydon, Lewisham, Hackney, etc. There are not more than 15 local councils that are kind of lumbered with elected mayor currently. And Tower Hamlets is one, Newham is one. And Newham and Tower Hamlets currently have at least reported moves and campaigns ongoing to get rid of the elected mayor post and scrap it. I say that there is not any likelihood that that will happen. And I link that immediately with the fact that both Tower Hamlets and Newham, which are for the Labour Party as the party of the incumbent in the post of the elected mayor at the expense of each borough. These Labour Party groups and grouplets are corrupt, anti-democratic, dishonest, and are carrying essentially the racist narrative of denial, which you shall be covering in every episode of the campaign aired or broadcast by the KhoodeelaarTV Channel online. Now back to Shamima Begum and the role of Charmless Council. During today, there was one statement published, and we accessed it through the internet, published by somebody called Kalam Chowdhury. Now, Kalam Chowdhury, we said we'll send him a detailed email, which is undergoing preparation and legal fact-checking, and it will be sent to him as soon as that is done. Kalam Chowdhury was also known as Abu Tahir, and is also known as Abu Tahir Chowdhury. And he was also known as the kind of president or chair of a thing called Aspire. I say thing because it is a thing. It's not a really genuine, rigorous, democratic political party. And it is set up, and it was set up by Lutfur Rahman and those who still believe that he is a significant kind of candidate for their ambition to have the Tower Hamlets Council mayor post grabbed by them through Lutfur Rahman. And that phrase grabbed by them is taken from the fact that this is March, this first week of March. And in the first week of March 2010, Channel 4 television broadcast a dispatches program which was fronted by Andrew Gilligan. And Andrew Gilligan's program showed footage of people either based directly at the East London Mosque or the London East London or the London Muslim Centre, London Muslim Centre. It is a complex of buildings that houses the East London Mosque and the London Muslim Centre, and also de facto accommodates the many activities done by a thing called Islamic Forum Europe. So Andrew Gilligan in that program, which was called, I think, Britain's Islamic Republic, said that a number of people were talking about putting Lutfur Rahman in post as the elected mayor. That was yet to happen. But that's what they said. And that's what happened. That's what they did. And despite the fact that that program was actually broadcast on the 1st of March 2010, the then Labour Party membership in Tower Hamlets and the membership of the Tower Hamlets Council, councillors, the side that belonged to the Labour Party, failed. They failed to stop that plot from taking shape and being implemented. And the rest, as I say, is history, but it's not. Although Lutfur Rahman was incumbent from October 2010 until his being kicked out by the Election Commission chair or the Electoral Commission chair or the Election Court chair Richard, licensed law trader Mori, also known as Richard Mori, quote, QC, who ousted Luthuraman on the 23rd of April 2015. Now, 2015 is the definitive kind of reference frame, because it was 2015, it was February 2015 that these girls, Shamima Begum and the two other friends, were first publicly reported as having left the UK and entered Syrian territory through a route via Turkey or from Turkey. So February, let's say the whole of February, Lutfur Rahman was still in post. March, he was still in post. And on the 23rd of April, that is almost the whole of April, except 1 week, the last week, Lutfur Rahman was in post, incumbent at the expense of Taramda's electors of the community as the elected mayor. So you've got October, November, December 2010, plus up to almost the end of April 2015. Lutfur Rahman was in post as the elected mayor, so-called, in the name of Taramdas. And in that period, Lutfur Rahman actually made literally thousands of executive decisions in the name of Tar Hamdas Council, in the name of exercising democracy, and at the expense of the community. But he did make thousands of decisions, executive decisions. And he made those executive decisions because according to the kind of procedure that allowed him to occupy that post of elected mayor at the expense of the community, he could make the decisions because he was the executive mayor. That is to say, he held the highest executive post, being allowed to make the highest decisions. Now, to the observers, objective observers, there is nothing higher than the issue of any child being led astray or made into radical or disappeared. Because for all intents and purposes, these three girls and their fourth friend who apparently left the UK for the same destination a year earlier in 2014, these four girls, to their families and their community, should be treated as having been kidnapped or hijacked or derailed or disappeared for all practical purposes. Because as far as we can see, there has never been any report, credible report, lawful report that connects or connected or has connected any of these girls with their biological families or the real families if the biological families were not involved in the raising of them. That any of their biological or real families, as I have defined, was or were involved in what they did in the derailment or the disappearance or their kidnapping or they are found to have crossed into Syria. So if that is the case, that these girls went missing, were disappeared, then imagine the horrible silence. Because any child that is found to have gone missing or not come back or not found alive for a few days even would have correctly, justifiably caused a lot of anguish and pain among many groups and individuals in the immediate community and outside in the wider public. So we are replacing the term that they went into ISIS or whatever for the ease of understanding and reference by saying that these girls were kidnapped or hijacked or disappeared. Remember why we are doing that, and we are about to repeat that why. The why is in order to express excessively, express the image of the local council that was responsible for safeguarding these children. And it failed. And the added, aggravated horror of the negligence is that they have remained silent. To this day, Tower Hamlets Council has had nothing to say about safeguarding duties that it neglected for six calendar years over these girls. So what would happen if these girls were, if any of them or any number of them were reported to have been kidnapped? Imagine Fleet Street. And just for comparison and to help the imagination, what happened to the boy, the child, the baby, Jimmy Bulja, still remains a very, very painful and traumatic and traumatizing event. And any child, rightfully, if they have been kidnapped or gone missing, or if some harm has been done to them, legitimately and rightly creates among the public the highest amount of sadness and mourning and despair for right reasons. And I'm saying that Shamima Begum has been kidnapped. And I'm saying that Shamima Begum never, ever even understood anything outside of Britain until she was kidnapped. And by kidnap, I mean the whatever process. I don't know what process or processes she was subjected to, or whatever it was. It was only possible because the Tower Hamlets Council, which had the duty to stop such processes, fell asleep or chose to fall asleep in the manner of Kumbhakarna in the Indian mythology. That it was awake, but it pretended to be asleep. Whichever the case, whether it was actually genuinely unaware of its duties, or it decided to neglect the duties it owed to Shamima Begum and the other three girls, the disaster was that these girls were kidnapped or hijacked or disappeared. Think about that. Now, the fact that the negligence was connected, the negligence by Tower Hamlets Council and by Lutfur Rahman were connected with the negligent attitude exposed in the behavior of some of the closest colluders with Lutfur Rahman and the plot to have an elected mayor. Because none of them has to date expressed any opinion about Tower Hamlets Council's negligence of duty. The duty that the Tower Hamlets Council was under, according to the Prevent program that we shall discuss later, but essentially according to the Safeguarding Children duty or duties in detail. Councils, including Newham Council, are known. It's not a kind of construction by me. It's a fact-based assertion. It's a factual assertion. Factual assertion to which written, recorded comments and supports have been published by the likes of Michael Gillard. Michael Gillard is a known reporter and is often referred to as an investigative reporter. And Gillard has written the legacy book about corruption regarding the 2012 Olympic Games staged in Stratford, which is in the London Borough of Newham. Now, Gillard also managed to talk to Roxana Fiers a few months after, or around the time of our election, to the post of elected mayor, executive mayor, in May 2018. But the exact date or dates of contacts made by Michael Gillard with Roxana Fiers, I cannot see the dates written in front of me. So if necessary, I shall check if that is possible to check and find, and I shall update the bit of this commentary that I'm making now. Now, Gillard has said that Roxana Fiers apparently wanted to take action against the gangsters' influence in running or controlling the Newham Council around the time of the 2012 Olympic Games. But Gillard also published the statement that Fiers was then warned against taking any action. And Gillard insinuated, suggested that the warning came from the gangsters themselves, whoever the gangsters were. Gillard didn't go into detail on that part, but that Fiers was warned against taking the action. That is proof. That is proof that the gangsters had such influence over Newham Council, even after 6 years after the end of the Olympic Games, which the gangsters abused and controlled many parts of and many aspects of. So that shows that the election of an elected executive mayor did not necessarily mean that the executive mayor was the executive acting in making the decisions independently. Because the gangsters that Michael Gillard referred to were not, of course, in any way or shape officially to be found in the controlling of the Newham Council, but they were the dominant powers behind the scenes, as Michael Gillard has published. So, corruption, the point of referring to the Newham Council at this stage is the prevalence and the preponderance and the dominance of corruption in local councils and in councils like Newham. In the case of examining the evidence, that is, not the case arguing in defense of the council, but in the case of illustrating the preponderance, the widespread corruption, abuse, illegality, and negligence by Tower Hamlets Council, we can cite a number of cases, court cases, that can be checked or that can be used to check the timeline, if you like, or create a timeline that is at least citable without any risk of it being denied. And the court cases include the following, quote, elected councillors. One is a councillor called Akhtar, who was jailed pretty early on after the election of Luthu Rahman to the post of incumbent, the post of executive mayor. And there are unpublished but privately obtained claims that this Akhtar was actually the victim of a revenge plot by persons in Tower Hamlets Council, and person very closely known to or operating with Lutfur Rahman, who, according to this unpublished, privately obtained account from a number of persons, who sexually kind of took revenge against her because she would not give in to their sexual advances. That is the unpublished but privately obtained information released to the Khoodeelaar campaign by several sources who are still alive and very much in Tower Hamlets. So they said that this Akhtar was actually victimized by the status quo, by the regime that Lutfur Rahman fronted, who initiated the revenge plot against her based on the fact that she said no to their sexual advances, has not been publicly published. But we know that names have been mentioned, several names. So this was the first one. And whatever the motive attributed to those ones for having her prosecuted over housing related scandal or illegality or crime, whatever the actual motivation or motivations, the fact that she could be prosecuted was based on factual behavior on her part that were actually stood in the trial against her in the Crown Court. So we don't know this Akhtar person, but we don't know several male Bangladeshis, both councillors as well as Lutfur Rahman as mayor, so-called, and others that are close or very close to Lutfur Rahman or were very close at the time, that they abused whatever relationship they had prior to that prosecution of this Akhtar, that they abused their relationship with her and penalized her and made her go to prison because she said no to their sexual advances. Now, that is something we again qualify by saying that there is no accessible, published evidence to that effect, but we have only been given the facts by sources that still exist, but we have not named them for legal reasons. And we say that we have no evidence to say that this line about the motive for this particular former councillor being prosecuted has been legally substantiated in any court of law. So the persons named remain innocent until proven guilty of those charges. But we had to add that disclaimer and qualifier. And we shall be happy to publish any relevant details if any of them, including Lutfur Rahman, has credible ground to deny what we have shared here. And we shall give due space to any credible denial, lawfully credible denial, that Lutfur Rahman may issue or state to us directly. But the fact that there was this particular councillor who could be manipulated and prosecuted and was found to have done something in housing benefit or housing kind of allocations that led her to be sent to jail. Now, let me also recall, for the benefit of those who are watching this for the first time or watching this more carefully than they had done in the previous kind of occasions when we broadcast or posted or published the same sort of information, that these prosecutions for housing fraud or housing allocation related fraud, these prosecutions have been among the most persistent kind of thread or threads in terms of the council employees or councillors being prosecuted on housing benefit or housing allocation related fraud in Tower Hamlets Council. We go back to the 1980s. Remember the 1980s, it was the 1986 May council election in Tower Hamlets that allowed the now Lib Dems, but then there were Liberal SDP alliance or something like that. The SDP was there very much because that was within 5 years after the establishment of the Gang of Four led SDP. The Gang of Four, David Owen, one of the most corrupt, one of the most racist, and one of the most poisonous anti-Muslim, Muslim-hating criminals, has had his main house in Limehouse in Tower Hamlets. But that's not connected with the corruption allegations, etc., against the particular Tower Hamlets ex-councillors that we are going to name. So involved in the various court cases as the accused, involved were now former councillor Sajjad Mia, who was a member of the SDP Liberal coalition or collusion. And there had been another councillor, the white councillor who was a licensed law trader, who was either jailed or disbarred or somehow disciplined because of his illegality, but that was not necessarily about housing allocation or housing benefit. But it was a Lib Dem or liberal councillor at the time. That happened before the 1980s or during the early 1980s or late 1970s. So there were Sajjad Mia and there were other councillors in that party or employees, Bangladeshi employees employed by the Liberal SDP alliance after 1986. There were at least two members at the time who were found to have done wrong and who were either disciplined or sacked. One of them is now known to be quite close to or have been quite close to John Biggs, who carries the card in the name of the Labour Party. Back to the 1986 council election and the taking of the control of the Tower Hamlets Council by the then Liberal SDP alliance. Quite apart from the allegations that Sajjad Mia managed to kind of avoid in the end, because he told the court that it wasn't him who had done the wrong, but it was a mistake. We say that within quotation mark. It was a mistake committed by one of his brothers or his brother. So the rap, as they say, or the blame was shifted onto Sajjad Mia's brother. And so therefore Sajjad Mia was not forced to quit or resign on that ground. But Sajjad Mia didn't succeed in continuing to be a councillor for much longer. And it didn't have the sole reason wasn't just his being allegedly involved in crime dealing with housing allocation or something to do with the housing role of the Tower Hamlets Council. The biggest illegality and the biggest corruption and the biggest crimes that were committed by the first 4 years of the Liberal SDP alliance cabal was about housing, but not about housing benefit as such. It was remotely, but it wasn't directly. Because the most racist operative in that cabal was Jeremy Shaw. And in accordance with the brainwashing suffered by the absolute majority of the Bangladeshis who were lured or who were crafty enough to get into membership of the then Liberal SDP alliance, Jeremy Shaw was not only superior to the Bangladeshis, or at least to the Bangladeshis in Tower Hamlets, but he was superior even to all the known intellectuals in the world. He was described in superlative terms by the morons who had been brainwashed into thinking that Jeremy Shaw was the most intelligent person ever to walk on the face of the earth. But of course, Jeremy Shaw was a racist. And the fact that he apparently went to Oxbridge was the absolute flood of attacks that represented the flood of attacks on anyone else, because he was therefore and thereby certifiably the most intelligent person on the face of the earth. Equipped with that kind of stupidity and lying and subservience and mental slavery on the part of the Bangladeshis who had managed to become the members of the or relevant members of the Liberal SDP alliance, Jeremy Shaw mounted the biggest attack on the human rights of the Bangladeshis, especially on housing. So the narrative that Jeremy Shaw published or stated or relied on was a racist, crass racist narrative that defied all common sense, all humanity, all compassion, and all legal obligations owed by the local council. That is the phrase, legal obligations and duties. I helped any number of persons, including families, that were the policy targets of the Jeremy Shaw racism. And the details I can publish if anyone legally challenges me. Otherwise, I assert that I did help, and I have been helping all these years, and many people victims of many criminal activities, corrupt activities, dishonest activities, racist activities and policies by many local councils. That includes today, and that includes this week, and that of course includes Tower Hamlets Council and Neom Council. Anyone who thinks that the use of the phrase racists and the targets of racism, the phrase targets of racism, in any way implies that I am assuming that the targets of racism themselves are innocent otherwise, and the racists are only white people. That is not the case. The racists operate through various layers and various levels of stooging, and that includes Bangladeshis in this case, who become stooges of the racists who are almost invariably white decision makers or post holders making the decisions, and they give the orders to these servile mental slaves who carry out the details. So several members of the Bangladeshi community, demographically Bangladeshi community, not committed to defending the rights of those Bangladeshis that are targeted by racists. So several of those opportunistic, careerist, self-seeking, self-serving Bangladeshis who became members of the SDP Liberal Alliance during the 1980s became apologists for Jeremy Shaw. And they even marched or even they shouted slogans in the Brick Lane area in support of the racist anti-Bangladeshi policy statements made by Jeremy Shaw. So that is direct complicity with a big crime, organized by the then local council. A crime conceived of openly and conceived of racistly by Jeremy Shaw and Eric Flounders and others. These are notorious names of racists operating as councillors or around council in Tower Hamlets. And in this context, as I said, I remind of the racist chair of the local government committee of Tower Hamlets Labour Party called Jenny Fisher. Jenny Fisher is a racist who is still acting as a mentor for Luthuraman and his colleagues. And we shall update on Jenny Fisher and her racism as operated by her stooges, including Luthuraman, in due course. So the complexity of the corrupt aspects of local councils, the complexities are very complex indeed. And the complexities are demanding, intellectually demanding, empirically demanding, unless a great deal of concentrated attention is paid to the research, to the collection of the materials and evidence, the diagnosis of the evidence. It is not possible to understand the factual complexities of these corrupt, racist council administrations. So when Jeremy Shaw declared that far from being entitled to housing by Tower Hamlets Council, these families and individuals were not. So therefore, they would be offloaded onto ships on the Thames River, where they would be given alternative accommodations. We defeated that, of course, and as a part of the campaign to defeat the Lib Dems, we call them Lib Dems now in my kind of editing of the language and the name. It was the SDP Liberal Alliance that we defeated. And as the direct result of the defeat, those criminals, councillors and leaders, including the leading councillor Eric Flounders, decided to decamp. They decided to leave the local area where Tower Hamlets Council was based at the Patriot Square off Cambridge Heath Road, London E2. And that is when the moves were moved to today's Mulberry Place in E14 2BG began. So it was directly as a result of the campaign that I organized. I didn't organize singularly. I had other people with me. But I played, as can be seen, the leading role in the sustaining of the campaign against the Lib Dems. So it's a corrupt council, regardless of which political party controls the council for the relevant period. So when Luthuraman became incumbent in the post of the executive mayor, his attitude of contempt for and indifference to the ordinary voters and the ordinary community was not something he hid. It was wide open. And that brazen contempt and disregard and disrespect and denial of duties to the Bangladeshi community, let's say, was cruelly exposed when Ajmal Ahmad was murdered in 2013 near the Langdon Park School in Poplar. And the fact that these children, these girls, Shamima Begum and the other three between 2014 and 2015 were reported to have entered Syria to join ISIS, apparently, left no doubt as to the extent of Lutfur Rahman's contempt, hostility to, and disconnection with the ordinary community. Because these girls were victims of negligence by the Armed Council, full stop, period. And Lutfur Rahman was imposed as the executive mayor over the whole time that they were betrayed. These girls were betrayed. So this is the summary of the rebuttal of the lying package published by people supporting the retention of the mayor post and people praising Lutfur Rahman while he was in post as the mayor. And we said that the list of lies that have been included in that pack of lies is going to be contextually put to the person called Kalam Chaudhry, aka Abu Tahir Chaudhry. And he will be asked to give substantive evidence in support of the claims that he has published, in support of Lutfur Rahman, and in support of the retention of the corrupt post of elected mayor in Tower Hamlets. And then we shall update depending on the kind of state of response by Abu Tahir Chaudhry, aka Kalam Chaudhry. And we shall be doing the necessary updates in due course about what is going on in Neom Council. Because we are at this moment awaiting fact-checking verification on at least 10 different sets of questionnaires that we have put to Neom Council and to Rukhsana Fias